Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about business history, doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, all so we can distill from them lessons that we can apply to our business and professional lives. So for those of you who didn't see yesterday's show, you saw the new opening. It's actually not new. That's our opening from the original season, our first season of the Way to Wow shows, and I added it in. I think it's a nice little way to get things started, and would be curious to hear what you think as well. So if you have a thought, please feel free to drop it into our social media, or you can send me an email. All those links and my email address will be in the show notes after this episode posts. So today I'm going to be talking about what is perhaps the seminal military book that is used in a business context, used in the business world. And that is a book called, I have it here, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Okay. Now, this being that it's written by a man named Sun Tzu, he's Chinese. It was originally written in Chinese. This is an English translation of the book. And I'm going to start out by just giving you a little bit of a history of Sun Tzu and the art of war. And then talk about how it applies to business. So Sun Tzu was a Chinese general, strategist, and philosopher. We think he lived in what's called the Eastern Zhao period of ancient China, during what's called the Spring and Autumn period from 770 to 476 BCE. And the book itself was written, scholars think, sometime in the 5th century BCE. Now, the details of Sun Tzu's life are not particularly clear, at least as of when I did my research. And the reason I say that is because I said something on the show yesterday about something being unclear, and then an hour later, a friend of mine mentioned to me that it had been conclusively determined that Christopher Columbus was Jewish. So, okay, well, there you go. So, hard to keep up sometimes. But in any event, there are the ideas around that Sun Tzu was not an actual individual, that he was a compilation of people. This idea is, you hear it about Jesus and other prominent figures. Who knows? I mean, for our purposes, I don't see any reason to attribute Sun Tzu to being anything other than a general who was who lived during the Eastern Zhao period in China. So the point of the book was to create a treatise on the strategy and philosophy and tactics of war. And so the book consists of 13 chapters, and each one is focused on a different aspect of warfare. And they include things like planning, strategy, using spies, flexibility, terrain, leadership, all these different aspects. And Sun Tzu's intention was to emphasize the psychological side of warfare as opposed to the combat or the arms fighting side of warfare. And I think that's one of the reasons why the book has endured for 2,500 years at this point, a little bit longer than that. The book was very influential in ancient China, and it was adopted into Chinese military philosophy, and it actually spread throughout Asia. So it it became part of Japanese and Korean military doctrine as well. Now, it wasn't discovered in the West until the 18th century. So, a French Jesuit named, I'm going to look at his name here so I give it to you correctly, Jean-Joseph Marie Amiot, was the first Westerner to translate it into presumably French in 1772. And he translated Sun Tzu's ideas into kind of a European frame of reference, if you will, and it became very influential in Western military thinking, especially by Napoleon, evidently. And over time, many Western military strategists, including Karl von Clausewitz, whose book I'm going to be talking about later this year, they took a lot from Sun Tzu's philosophy and made it part of their overall philosophy as well. So, in more contemporary times, especially sort of in the 20th century around World War II, once again, the art of war had another sort of resurgence, this time in Western military thinking. And it will also gain popularity among Western military leaders and American generals, especially during the Vietnam War. In the latter part of the 20th century, it was discovered by the Western business world and has become a very popular sort of source, if you will, of business strategy. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is how Sun Tzu's ideas translate into ways that we can look at our businesses and our professional practices in a more strategic way, thinking about the tactics we use, etc. So I have, I think it's 10 points that I'm going to share with you that come from Sun Tzu's book. And I think one of the good things, I think perhaps the best part of taking a business strategy from Sun Tzu is it's very comprehensive. So for those of you who may be regular watchers of the show, some of the themes that I'm going to talk about, you'll see I've developed from other sources, other military thinkers, various battles that have been fought, drawing lessons from those. Here with Sun Tzu, he gives a pretty complete compendium of ideas that are very useful as we think about our businesses and how we want to build them, how we want to set them up for success. So, excuse me, the first one is strategic planning and preparation. And Sun Tzu says in his book, every battle is won before it is fought. Now, if you've seen any of my shows on real estate investing, particularly on my show, People Making Money, you've heard me say that you make money on real estate when you buy it, not when you sell it. And it seems counterintuitive because you're spending money to buy a piece of real estate. But the reality is, how you buy it will largely determine whether you've got a profitable investment, because real estate needs to be bought with a plan. And once that plan is executed, that should derive or even lock in the profitability of that real estate investment. That's why among successful real estate investors, you will hear this adage, gosh, pretty much universally, I think, that you make money on real estate when you buy it. So to a large extent, the same is true in business, although I'm not talking about buying and selling businesses now. I'm talking about running a business or running a professional practice. So if we're going to be successful, we're actually going to win the battle win that success before we go and execute. And the reason why I say that's the case, or really not me, but Sun Tzu says it's the case, is because success comes from careful planning and preparation. So it's a popular idea, especially in the tech industry. I'm told. My friend Michael, who's a data scientist, talks to me about this on a pretty regular basis. This idea: move fast, break things, figure stuff out, right? So while there is some merit to that idea, I'm broadcasting this just 2 days after SpaceX's successful launch and recovery of its, I think it's called the Big Booster rocket or something like that, where they caught it in this sort of chopsticks, this 20-story high, massively heavy booster was caught so it could be used again. The reality is, when you think about how successful it was, that didn't happen by moving fast and breaking stuff. There was obviously a tremendous amount of thought, a tremendous amount of planning, and figuring out how best to do this. Now, by the way, it was no sure thing that this contraption and there's a name for it that I don't recall, but this contraption for catching the booster, there was no guarantee that it was going to work. But compared to other strategies that they might have tried, such as landing the booster upright the way we see in cartoons, they were very sure that was not going to work, because it was so tall and heavy it would inevitably fall over after it landed on the ground and then get damaged, and probably too much to be able to send it up again. So there was obviously strategizing, planning, figuring all this out. Now, in the end, and by the way, every battle is won before it is fought doesn't mean that every battle is won. Okay, so those aren't the same things. What Sun Tzu is saying is good planning, careful preparation is what's going to lead to success. However, sometimes you just aren't going, no matter how well you plan and how well you prepare, you're not going to be successful. By the way, it may be that the enemy has planned better and prepared better than you have, or despite your planning and preparation, you've put in a fatal flaw into your strategy, and so therefore you're not successful. Nonetheless, planning and preparation are crucial if we're going to be successful in business, just like if we're going to be successful in battle. Okay, second is know your competition and market. So if you know the enemy and you know yourself, okay, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. That's another aphorism of Sun Tzu. And the idea is, we want to understand the marketplace. We want to understand what are the competitive advantages that we have, that our competitors have. What are the competitive disadvantage that we have versus our competitors? So I'll give you an example of what I mean. So when I had my previous real estate company, one of the services I provided was real estate property management, and it was at a time when property management companies were merging at a pretty rapid pace, and the days of small companies like mine being able to expand and grow organically, it really wasn't happening. Because of what was going on overall in the market, owners were not owners were in many cases taking their management back because times were difficult, and so I thought that, well, with the business climate being difficult, and that people who owned real estate, but it wasn't their primary business, would be more interested in hiring a property management company because they needed to focus on their primary business. Now, I was relatively new to the real estate business at that time, and that was a misread of the market by me. What I probably should have done, not probably, what I should have done is looked at past recessions and seen what had happened with management companies then. And perhaps then I would have realized, no, what happens is, despite needing to focus attention on their primary businesses, property owners still end up taking the management back in order to save the money, and they just work much longer hours. And so the way management companies grow is by merging, gaining economies of scale, reducing the cost per the cost per unit to manage the portfolio that they manage, etc. So this is why we need to know the competition and know the market, but really look into it as deeply as possible, and not just the current market, but past markets, past times in the market that may give us thoughts and insight into how things are going to be happening now and into the near future. Next, number 3 is adaptability. So Sun Tzu says, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. Now, this is something I've spoken about before, right? When things are going crazy and people are having a hard time catching up, keeping track of what's going on, there very likely may be the chance for us to insert ourselves somewhere where we couldn't have gotten in before and take advantage of their disarray. Now, in order to do that, we need 2 things. Well, we need 3 things. We need the strategic planning and preparation so we can be ready to take advantage of an opportunity quickly. Second, we need to have very deep and broad market knowledge of our own capabilities as well as our competitors. And then we have to be adaptable. So we have to be able to turn on a dime, as they say, in order to take advantage of that opportunity that comes from perhaps our competitors or the marketplace being in chaos. Now, it's very easy to describe. It's not so easy to pull off, of course. And so part of what I think allows us to be adaptable is that we are consistently engaged in the market. And when I say consistently engaged, what I mean is we're not just taking care of our work, taking care of our clients. We're also on a consistent basis engaged with looking at the market, looking what's happening in the economy, reaching out to other new potential sources of business, new potential clients, and having conversations, going to conferences on a regular basis. And that allows us to when we need to be adaptable, to stand the best chance of success if we make that pivot in order to try and take advantage quickly of an opening caused by chaos in the market. Okay, so by the way, these strategies, they're really not standalone strategies in the sense of, well, as long as I plan and prepare, I'm good to go. No, Sun Tzu's philosophy is a philosophy that integrates all of these different ideas into an overall view of how war should be fought, or in our case, how business should be pursued. Okay, next, efficiency and resource allocation. So the wise warrior avoids the battle. And what Sun Tzu means by that is, don't fight if you don't need to. Okay, so I don't know if you're fans of the TV show from the 1970s, MASH, the brilliant show that was with Alan Alda and I'm going up on the names of the other actors and actresses who were in it, but it was based on the movie. But the TV show is very different from the movie, especially as it developed over the years. So there's an episode where a Marine Corps, I think it was a Marine Corps colonel, he decides he's always fighting. Basically, he's always sending his troops out, his Marines out to fight, and as a result, he has a tremendously high percentage of casualties in his unit. And this, in the context of the show, this goes on, day after day, week after week, month after month, and the Alan Alda character Hawkeye gets very frustrated with this. And by the way, I'm not suggesting this is historically accurate. I'm just using this as an example from the TV show because it's so vivid. And one day, the colonel comes to the MASH unit to visit his Marines who are injured, and they're in the post-op, recovering. And Hawkeye decides he has to do something to stop this colonel's incessant need to engage in battle. And so he decides that if he can operate on him, that he'll be laid up for a period of time, and because of that, he'll be taken out of command of his unit, and then someone else will get command of the unit, and who is, from Hawkeye's perspective, more sensible. And so he gives him something to drink. He gives him a martini, as such as they were made, and he puts something in it that gives the colonel a very severe stomach ache. And then when the colonel starts, complaining that he's got this terrible pain, Hawkeye tells him that he has an appendicitis and they better operate immediately. And the colonel says, "But if you operate, I'll lose my command." And he says, "Well, it's better than having a burst appendix." Basically, Hawkeye's friend BJ says to him, "You can't do this." So they're prepping the colonel for surgery, and BJ goes to Hawkeye and he says, "You cannot operate on a man who doesn't need to have an operation. That is against everything that we stand for as doctors." And it poses an interesting moral dilemma, of course. But the point of the example is that there are commanders out there, there are business people out there who they want to engage in essentially conflict for the sake of the conflict. In fact, I'm dealing with a situation like that right now. A couple of them, actually. The parties just seem to thrive on conflict, even though in the end it's a huge waste of resources, and it's a waste of time. It's a lot of anxiety. It's a lot of stress. But that's evidently what these parties want. So what Sun Tzu is saying is, rather than frivolously engage in battle, or frivolously engage in conflict in business, in our context, allocate your resources carefully, wisely. Avoid battle where you can. So the strategic compromise that may come through diplomacy may be better for the long-term well-being of your country and your military forces, right? So all of these things need to be looked at. And by the way, sometimes we may be pursuing a particular strategy and we end up sort of bumping our head against a brick wall. We need to also be strategic about understanding when we've gotten to a point where continuing to pour resources into this strategy is a mistake, and just withdraw. Pull back from the market, cut our costs, and maybe look, re-strategize, come up with a different plan, prepare for that and maybe take off in a different direction. So we want to use resources are not unlimited, especially here in the United States. I think we have this rather strange idea that resources are unlimited. They never are, not even for the US government. Okay, so we need to husband our resources, allocate them carefully. Okay, next, leadership and management. And by the way, these of course are not the same thing. To lead is to show our team, our group, where we want to go, why we want to go there, why it's important to get there, etc. Management is the function of taking care of more of the sort of day-to-day logistics and that sort of thing that will take us where the leader is leading us. Okay, so Sun Tzu's philosophy, which I think has been widely adopted in business these days, is a leader leads by example, not by force. Now, of course, in a military setting, there are times when, soldiers, sailors, Marines, whatever, can be ordered to go forward, even if they really don't want to. But setting that aside, in the military today, you see very little leadership by coercion. And the same is true in business. In business, even more so. We really, to try and coerce our people, we are almost for sure going to dramatically reduce their productivity. We're going to raise the probability that we will not be successful. And so what we need to do is we need to lead by example. We need to inspire our people if we can. But mostly, I think we need to explain to them where it's important to get where we're going and get their buy-in and get their buy-in as early as possible. Okay, now that doesn't mean if we have an organization with 10,000 employees that we need to get the buy-in of all 10,000, but we probably do need to get the buy-in of not just our senior leadership team, but even our mid leadership team, and stage that as part of our planning and preparation, so that everyone in a leadership or management position can articulate why we're going where we're intending to go. Okay, and along with this, and this is something you see done particularly well in the Marine Corps, information and ideas needs to be not only traveling down the so-called chain of command, it needs to travel back up, so that leaders get the information that they need in order to make adjustments in as close to real time as possible. And this is another reason why leading by force can be very negative, because it can cut off the information and ideas that may be coming up from the frontline troops. Okay, so if they're being forced to do something, they're they're being essentially told, we're not interested in you or your welfare or your ideas or your thoughts, and so they're going to be far more reluctant to share them. Okay, so we want to keep an atmosphere of open communication, so it's going up and down in a sort of a back and forth feedback loop in order to be as efficient as possible. Okay, next is we want to take decisive action. So Sun Tzu's philosophy is opportunities multiply as they are seized. So if you think about the previous 5 concepts, they all lead us to a point where we can take decisive action. And this is important, not just from a leadership standpoint. Wishy-washy leaders, people, they're uncomfortable following them, especially if what they need to do is difficult. So most people respond to decisiveness. But the other reason decisiveness is so important is it gives people the confidence that everything that's come before it now can be used in a way that can really help help the organization, help all the team members gain ground. Okay, and that's what's so important about decisive action. So to take kind of haphazard action, it doesn't have a feeling of commitment. It doesn't give people a sense that we really need to give this our all. Also, the reason it's important to take decisive action is if we have to, for perhaps for the sake of efficient use of resources, change our plan, we need to do that decisively as well. So while we want that feedback loop going, up and down the chain of command, we want that going on all the time so we can be, again, as close to in real time as possible evaluating our progress. Okay, and we want to be getting input from people at all levels. If we're going to make a change, again, we want to make that change decisive so that people have a sense that there is a strategy. It can be successful, and that's why we're having this change in direction. Okay, so when we take action, we want it to be decisive, and we want to step forward smartly, as we sometimes say in the military. Next is we want to build alliances. So in most cases, we are not going to be able to do everything, even if you're a so-called solo entrepreneur, right? Where you're the only person in your business. You're going to do the marketing, you're going to do the execution, you're going to do the bookkeeping, all that stuff. Nonetheless, it's extremely unlikely that any one person is going to be competent enough in all of those areas that they're going to be able to keep up with them. Better to team up with other people, even if they're not employees in your organization, who can provide you with expertise so that you can focus on what you do best. So perhaps you're best at execution, okay, and you're decent at marketing, and you really stink at bookkeeping and those kinds of administrative activities, right? Well, so the sensible thing to do, perhaps, would be to partner with someone who they understand the business that you're in, but what they're really good at is marketing, because now you're supporting each other, right? The person who's brilliant at marketing can bring in the business, and you who are brilliant in execution can perform that business, and you both need each other. Okay, and then you can perhaps farm out the administrative work. Maybe get a bookkeeper on a independent contractor basis, to handle the important admin, at least that important administrative duty. Okay, so think about building alliances. Now, I did that in the context of a very small business. Even for medium and large size companies, oftentimes alliances are the best way to go. Look, you see this all the time when, for example, a company will hire a celebrity or a particular sports personality, and that person will promote the company's products, or they will develop a line of products based on that. So perhaps the best known is Air Jordans, right, by Nike. Michael Jordan, I guess he's not considered the greatest basketball player of all time anymore. He's been surpassed. But when I was, much younger, and Michael Jordan was playing basketball, I think at the time he was considered the greatest basketball player in the world. And Nike made this partnership with Michael Jordan, and they brought out these shoes, Air Jordan, right? And both Nike and Michael Jordan benefited tremendously from that alliance. And I don't know, that was just one I picked out of my memory. But these kinds of alliance, and it doesn't have to be a huge big alliance like that. We as small business people, or as professional practitioners, we can make alliances as well, right? I have several alliances with people who are in the trusts and probate and estate planning realm, and we help each other out with things like marketing, with answering questions, all those kinds of things. So those alliances are typically the best way to go because they extend our influence and they provide support for what we're doing, without necessarily having to expend additional resources beyond perhaps some of our time. Okay, next, when we're especially when we're in the planning and preparation stages, we want to consider deception as a competitive advantage. And so, again, one of Sun Tzu's aphorisms is all warfare is based on deception. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure that's exactly true. But I think the idea is that, number one, we want to keep our plans secret, right? We don't want to be spreading them out, because all we do by letting our competitors know what we're doing is give them more time to prepare to counteract our strategy or change their own in order to try and either keep ahead of us or get ahead of us, right? So we want to be careful about our internal deliberations. We don't want to tip our hands, and we may even want to engage in some deception, in the sense that we might put out some raise some trial balloons that may indicate we're considering a one particular strategy, even though we're actually considering another strategy. Nothing wrong with that in the business world today. So, to the extent that we can mislead our competitors about our intentions, we can create uncertainty in the marketplace, and that may itself create some chaos, right? That we now can take advantage of and try and sort of slip through a crack in the competition and emerge stronger and more successful than we were before. Now, next is we want to sustain momentum. So Sun Tzu says, move swift as the wind and closely formed as the wood, attack like the fire, and be still as the mountain. So it's an interesting idea in business is we want to always be thinking about moving forward. However, we need to think about sustained motion more in the line of a marathon, as opposed to, for example, wind sprints, right? So wind sprints allow us, we sprint really fast for a short period of time, a huge burst of speed, but then we have to rest for a while. Now, the problem with the wind sprint metaphor, if you will, is we may run out of energy right at the time that there is some sort of tactical steps that we can take for taking advantage of some kind of situation that allows us to jump ahead of our competitors. So we want to have a sense of sustaining momentum, okay, so that we always can be taking advantage of what's going on in the market, even as we conserve some energy, so that if we need to take some quick, decisive action, we can. And that's a difficult thing to balance. So I have a question here from a viewer. He's asking, what's my service history? So just briefly, I was in the United States Navy for 16 years. I served as a chaplain with the Marine Corps and the United States Navy. I worked also with the Army and the Air Force at various times. And prior to being in the Navy, I was in my own business for 20 years, and prior to that, I worked for other people. So that's where the marrying of business and military lessons comes. But thanks very much for your question. Um, so again, we want to have as sustained momentum as we can. And when you look at, for example, General George Patton, right? That was what he sought to do. He wanted to keep the momentum, keep the pressure on the enemy all the time, and be ready for that moment when he could burst through and have a breakthrough, right? As opposed to Field Marshal Montgomery, who was more of kind of a set piece commander. You know, he wanted to plan his battle, execute his battle, sort of consolidate, maybe even withdraw a little bit, and then plan the next one, right? And that was very much how World War I was fought, which, you know, was where he learned it, you know, most likely. But Patton came from a different philosophy, and indeed, it was why he was such a successful commander during World War II. He was able to sustain that momentum, and not just, by the way, you know, among his soldiers, but his logistical forces, his intelligence forces. Everything was geared towards sustaining momentum. Finally, we want to exploit weaknesses. Okay, and this is you can see all these other points are leading up to we want to be in a position where as again, in Sun Tzu's words, attack him where he is unprepared, appear where you are not expected. Okay, and again, General Patton is you know, the quintessential example of this. By continually moving forward with sustained momentum, always pressing on the enemy, probing here, probing there. What he was doing was looking for that point of weakness that he could then exploit and drive through and gain, you know, even more decisive victory at that point, right? And we want to do the same thing with our competitors. This is why sustained momentum is so important, because by keeping pressure on our competitors and making them have to act, in essence, according to our timeline, we raise the possibility that they will make a mistake, right? Because they're having to react and respond, as opposed to set their own tempo, set their own criteria, work according to their own plan. Okay, so I'm trying to think of a business example of okay, so I've talked about this example before, but if you recall, some of you may, you know, honestly be too young when New Coke came out. Okay, a absolute disaster. This was a ploy, not a ploy, that diminishes it. It was an idea by the Coca-Cola company to try and take on Pepsi more directly by shifting their formula to taste more like Pepsi, which to my palate is a sweeter beverage than Coca-Cola is. Well, the problem with that is Coke drinkers liked how Coke tasted, and so they rejected New Coke pretty much en masse, right? So a couple things happened. One is Pepsi saw the debacle of New Coke, and they exploited that weakness in order to expand their market share. Now, when Pepsi did that, Coke realized they'd made a huge mistake, and they immediately had to pull back. But you could, for anyone who was watching the Cola Wars at that time, you could almost literally see the momentum shifting. So Coca-Cola was thinking, we're going to grab the momentum with New Coke. Oops, rejected by the market. Pepsi grabs the initiative and pushes forward. And Coke needed to do something to stop Pepsi's momentum. And so they came up with this plan of, oops, we goofed. They brought out Classic Coke, right? We're bringing back what you really want under this new name. And of course, eventually New Coke went away and we came back just to have Coca-Cola. So you can see in the cola wars really the principles that Sun Tzu is talking about. You can see them acted out, and there are books on that. By the way, I would encourage you to to take a look at those books. They're quite interesting. So those are the principles of the art of war by Sun Tzu. Now this short summary of them is not a substitute for reading Sun Tzu's book. The book is brilliant, and you will gain far more from reading the book than you've gotten just from this short 40 or so minute presentation. So I do encourage you to read the book. I will put, as I often do as I always do when I talk about a book, I will put a link to the book in the show notes. It is, an affiliate link. So if you click through it, I think I get 3 cents if you buy a book or something like that. But I encourage you to read The Art of War, but to read the original Art of War, not one of them that's where somebody has interpreted it into business principles. Those are fine, okay? But read this first, because put the source material, into your mind, so that you have the best chance of applying it to your business, your practice. Okay. And then, it's always useful to see how, or to read about how other people think it should be applied. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying don't ever read those books. I just encourage you to read the original book first. Get those principles kind of embedded in your strategic thinking, your planning, how you put together the tactics for your business, etc., before you start looking at how other people think you should do it. So that's our show for today. Thank you very much for joining me, especially Greasefire Games for your question. I'm glad to have you watching the show today. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And we're going to be doing our monthly economic echoes, looking at the economic data and figuring out how does it affect us as individuals, us, our family, and none of us experience, this is the example I always use, none of us experience inflation the way it's reported. The consumer price went up, index went up, I think it was 2.4%. Okay, well, that's fine. But unless you happen to have bought the exact copy of the basket of goods and services on which that particular CPI is developed, you didn't expect you didn't experience inflation that way. So please do join us. Do join me tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, for Economic Echoes on People Making Money. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. is my show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. And then a week from today is the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So I thank you again very much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, you are my bell. Courage at all times, my friends.